The first sign didn't come from the sky, it came from the marble. The columns of Olympus trembled with a dry, deep rumble, as if ancient bones were shifting inside the sacred mountain. Before any god could ask why, silence had already taken over the palace like a disease. The golden goblet stopped vibrating. The nectar lost its fragrance. The torches burning in the corridors turned bluish, casting a sickly light over the immortal faces. Even the divine servants, used to celestial arrogance, retreated into the shadows like animals sensing the approach of an invisible predator. Then she appeared. Athena crossed the central gallery, without armor, without her aegis, without her spear, and yet she seemed more dangerous than Ares clad in iron. Her steps were not hurried, they were a sentence. Each sound of her sandals against the stone was like the strike of a hammer on a coffin closed too soon. There was something in her face that the gods didn't recognize. It wasn't blind rage, it wasn't humiliation, it was conviction. The cold and terrible conviction of someone who had finally found the exact crack in the throne of all the powerful at once. Hera gripped the arms of her seat until her rings dug into her own skin. Hermes lost his smile. Apollo set aside his lyre without playing a single string. Even Poseidon, lord of the stormy sea, tasted rust rising in his mouth when he realized that Athena hadn't come to the hall to argue. She had come to break. That night, no god knew for sure what she had discovered. They only knew that some ancient truth, buried under decrees, myths, and oaths, had been torn from the depths of eternity. And every truth, when exhumed, comes back covered in the scent of the grave. Athena stopped in the center of the hall and raised just one hand. That was enough. The windows shook, the statues cracked. Outside, the clouds twisted over Olympus like dark fabric being wrung by invisible hands. The whole sky seemed to shrink back from what was about to happen. Zeus rose slowly, the father of the gods, the lord of lightning, the sovereign before whom human kings fell to their knees, faced his own daughter with something rare on his face, uncertainty, because there was power he could crush. But the truth, when wielded by Athena, had a different nature. Mortals have always imagined that the gods feared war, downfall, or fate. They were wrong. What truly terrified the Immortals was seeing the goddess of wisdom abandon prudence and use her intelligence as a blade. Strength destroys walls, the right mind destroys empires. And so it was, under a sky darkened before its time, with Olympus holding its breath and even Zeus himself unable to foresee the next move, that the day began when Athena challenged the gods, and none of them could stop her. There are stories in which gods descend to earth to punish proud kings, set armies ablaze, or crush monsters that dared to grow too powerful. But there are darker stories, heavier ones, harder to bear. These are the ones where the terror doesn't come from outside, but from within Olympus itself. Today, you're about to enter a story where sacred marble protects no one, where crowns can't hide the rot, and where wisdom, wounded to its core, decides to turn against those who always believe themselves above any judgment. Because even among the gods there is a limit, and someone crossed it. Athena was not prone to ordinary fits of rage. Her strength was never in the roar, but in precision. When Eris rose up, there was blood and screams. When Poseidon grew angry, there were chasms and foam. But when Athena chose to act, it was the very fabric of reality that began to lose its stability. This is not a story of simple battles, nor a shallow revenge, nor a pure heroism. It is a tale of ancient guilt, of power rotting from within, and of a goddess who, upon discovering the wake of a forbidden truth, decided that not even Zeus's throne deserved to remain unscarred. You will walk through halls where fear wears gold, corridors where silence is worth more than any oath, and altars built upon secrets so old that even the stones seem tired of bearing them. And at the center of this darkness will be Athena, walking without hesitation toward the confrontation that not even the Immortals could prevent. Don't expect empty words, easy solutions, or characters adorned with convenient virtues. What you'll find here is shadow, tension, and the kind of revelation that doesn't ask permission before destroying everything that once seemed solid. Because some truths don't arrive as light, they come as a blade. Before diving into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and help strengthen this space for dense, mythical, and dark narratives. Every action you take helps keep alive stories that don't shy away from the cruelest, most tragic, and most fascinating sides of the ancient gods. And I want to see you in the comments too. Tell me which city and state you're watching from. I want to imagine just how far this story is reaching as Athena's name travels through the night, knocks on different doors, and sends the same shiver down spines in distant places. Now take a deep breath and block out the noise of the world for a moment. Picture Olympus without music, without feasts, without any sparkle. Imagine the gods sitting on their thrones like frightened statues, realizing too late that the real danger didn't come from monsters, titans, or ambitious men. It came from within, because what begins now isn't just the story of a challenge. It's the chronicle of the day Athena raised her mind against the heavens, tore through the veil of divine authority, and showed the immortals that even they can tremble when the truth decides to walk armed. Olympus woke up to a strange chill, the kind that doesn't come from the wind, but from the expectation of some disaster yet to be named. The clouds hovered low over the divine palaces, and the gold of the domes looked sickly, as if the very light itself had stepped back a few paces, sensing what was about to come. Athena climbed the central stairs without armor. She carried neither the aegis, nor the spear, nor the dark-crested helmet that had made kings tremble so many times before the battle even began. And yet, her presence weighed more than any instrument of war. There was a silent, almost funeral rigidity about her. The servants stepped aside without being told. No one dared to ask why the goddess walked the halls as if she no longer recognized that house as her own. Her steps were slow, precise, and with each touch of her sandal on the marble, the sound echoed through the galleries, as if the palace itself were counting down the seconds to its own sentence. Hera was the first to see her up close. Seated on her high throne, she immediately noticed that something was broken in Athena's gaze. It wasn't a loss of control, nor was it suppressed tears. It was an old decision that had finally found the right moment to stop hiding. That, more than anger, was what wounded the Queen of Heaven's heart. Hermes appeared beside a column, trying to keep his usual lightness on his face. But the smile died before it could form. Apollo set aside his lyre, leaving his fingers motionless on the polished wood. Ares, used to recognizing war by its scent, lifted his head like a beast sniffing out blood. Even he realized that this wasn't ordinary rage. It was something much more dangerous. Zeus waited in the great hall, surrounded by lightning, trapped in bronze lanterns and columns carved with ancient victories. When Athena crossed the threshold, the king of the gods didn't speak. He just watched. Between father and daughter, a silence so thick opened up that the other immortals felt their throats go dry without knowing why. Athena stopped in the center of the hall and slowly closed her right hand. That gesture alone was enough. A crack ran across the white marble floor like a dart thread splitting open the skin of a corpse. The torches trembled. Outside, the sky changed color, taking on the shade of wet iron. Not a single god moved. For ages, Athena said in a low, cold voice, I have served this order. I protected cities, established laws, taught men strategy, and called justice what you called balance. She paused, and the entire hall seemed to lean in to listen to her. Today, I know what was underneath. Zeus then stepped down one step from the throne. The gesture was small, but on Olympus, small things often signaled catastrophe. Choose your words carefully, he said. Athena looked up. There was a metallic, cruel gleam in her eyes, like the reflection of a blade before it strikes. No, today the ones who need to choose carefully are you. No one yet knew what truth she carried in her invisible hands. No one understood the depth of the abyss that was beginning to open beneath the gods' feet. But everyone, from the most arrogant to the most cautious, felt the same thing at that moment. Olympus was no longer a palace. It had become a courtroom, and Athena had arrived not to defend herself, but to judge. The silence that spread through the hall wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a silence with weight, with temperature, with presence. The columns of Olympus seemed taller, colder, as if the palace itself had pulled away from its masters to better witness the beginning of that downfall. Athena stood motionless at the center, and that alone was enough to make even the oldest gods feel a chill run up their spines. Zeus gripped the arm of his throne tightly. The king of the gods was familiar with impulse, rebellion, open hatred, and even the insolence of the younger immortals, but he also knew Athena's nature. He knew she wouldn't set foot in that hall without carrying something sharper than a sword. Eris's fury exploded. Athena's was calculated, and calculation, when wounded, tends to cause damage that not even lightning can contain. Hera watched the scene with her head held high, though her chest was already filled with a sticky sense of foreboding. Hermes stayed by the column, far too quiet for someone made of movement and language. Apollo, with his silent lyre at his side, looked like a priest before an altar about to be desecrated. Hestia didn't lift her eyes. Maybe because she already sensed that certain truths, once spoken, forever change what we call home. Athena took another step forward. The sound of her sandal on the stone echoed like a broken seal. "You have held up this sky with silence," she said. Her voice didn't rise, didn't falter, didn't tremble. It was clear, icy, almost ritualistic. You turned lies into a foundation, crime into order, and called it necessity so you wouldn't have to face your own decay. Eris frowned, bothered less by what was said than by the tone. Words like those didn't usually circulate freely among the gods. Olympus tolerated envy, threats, adultery, vengeance, and whim, but it couldn't stand the language of moral accusation, because there are crimes that power can still justify. There are others that only survive as long as they aren't called by their true name. "You talk as if you're above everyone else," growled Poseidon, slamming his trident against the floor. The metallic sound echoed through the hall. Athena slowly turned her face toward him. "I'm not above," she replied. "I'm outside." And those two words fell into the room with such a heavy darkness that even the wind outside seemed to pause for a moment. Zeus then stood up fully. Lightning, trapped in the lanterns, flickered. "Be careful with the path you choose," he said, and his voice already carried the ancient resonance of decrees that bent kings and continents. But Athena did not back down. "The path was chosen long before me," she replied. "I was just the first to have the courage to look where it led." Hera closed her eyes for a second, as if she could feel her own inner wall cracking. There was something unbearable about that scene. Athena did not accuse with the loss of control of the offended. She accused with the clarity of someone who had gathered evidence within herself. And evidence is more dangerous than resentment. Resentment can be discredited. Evidence demands an answer. And an answer was exactly what the gods at that moment did not have. Outside, the clouds twisted above Olympus. The sky took on the color of wet lead. The statues of the ancient heroes, lined up in the gardens, began to show fine cracks at their bases, not from any physical violence, but because every structure built on lies, sooner or later, feels the weight of what it tried to hide. The entire palace seemed to understand this even before its inhabitants did. Then Athena raised what she had brought hidden until that moment. Not a scroll, not a weapon, not a trophy, but a truth ready to be spoken. Her eyes cut through Zeus like a blade through wet cloth. And when she opened her mouth to reveal the name Olympus had buried for centuries, The gods finally understood why none of them could stop her. Metis, Athena said. Just that. A single name, short and ancient, thrown into the heart of Olympus like a stone cast into a bottomless well. But the effect was devastating. The entire hall seemed to shrink around that word. Hera lost all color. Hermes lowered his eyes. Hestia closed her fingers around the flame, as if trying to keep even the fire from reacting. Zeus didn't answer right away. And that delay, so small for mortals, was colossal among the gods, because the king of the sky never hesitated when the truth was on his side. His pause was a silent confession. Athena noticed. Everyone noticed. The name hadn't been thrown out at random. It had struck the exact spot where the throne was starting to rot from within. You finally heard it, Athena continued, her voice as low as a blade being drawn from its sheath. The name of the goddess who was erased from the songs, ripped from the inscriptions, buried under decrees, and forcibly forgotten so your glory wouldn't reek of blood. Each word seemed to pass through the hall, leaving invisible marks on the columns, the thrones, the crowns. Apollo lifted his head as if he wanted to deny it, but he didn't. There was no way. He, Lord of light and prophecy, knew how to recognize the weight of a truth when it finally found a voice. Poseidon turned his face away. Ares stood still, uncomfortable in a way no battle had ever made him feel. Because war he understood, but this he did not. This was an accusation striking at the heart of power. Metis was swallowed, Athena said. Not by chance, not by fate, not as a metaphor. She was devoured so that a ruler's fear could disguise itself as necessity. Zeus closed his hand. The lightning bolts trapped in the lanterns trembled, casting crooked flashes across the ceiling. Even so, he didn't interrupt her. Maybe because he already knew that any word now would come too late. Athena took another step forward, and I, she said, was created as an ornament to that violence. I was turned into a miracle to cover up a crowding. I was celebrated as the daughter of Zeus's pure thought, while my mother's womb was reduced to silence within the legend. The sentence cut through the air like cold metal. Even the lesser gods, pressed against the walls, bowed their heads. Hera took a deep breath, but couldn't find a defense that didn't seem filthy to her. For ages, she had upheld that version, like someone propping up a cracked wall. Not out of conviction, but because the collapse would seem worse than maintaining the lie. But there, standing before Athena, every justification sounded small, worn out, almost indecent. The Queen of Olympus realized too late that certain lies, once exposed, turned their accomplices into living ruins. You can't tear apart the order of heaven because of the past, Poseidon tried to say, but the words died before they could take shape. Athena turned her face to him and replied with an almost inhuman coldness. You always call it the past when it's still upholding the privilege of the present. The blow was precise. No one argued, because it was true. The crime wasn't dead. It still fed the throne. Outside, the sky darkened for good. The clouds swirled over Olympus like morning in motion. In the courtyard, the statues began to lose chips of marble. A thin crack ran down the floor of the great hall until it touched the steps of Zeus's throne. It wasn't blind destruction, it was reality following Athena's words, as if the world itself confirmed every syllable she spoke. Then she raised her head and looked at her father without a trace of pity. Today, she said, you will not judge monsters, men, or kings. Today, Olympus will look at itself. And in that moment, more than the name of Metis or the accusation thrown, it was this promise that terrified the gods, because they all understood the same thing. Athena didn't just want revenge, she wanted memory. And memory, when it decides to return, strips the gold from everything it touches. Zeus stepped down one more step. The entire hall noticed the movement, as if a mountain had decided to walk. For ages, that gesture alone had been enough to end disputes, silence uprisings, and bend wills. That night, however, the way to the king of the gods did not bring order. It only confirmed that even the supreme authority, when cornered by the truth, must abandon the heights of the throne to try to survive on the ground. "Careful," said Zeus, and his voice reverberated through the columns like thunder trapped in stone. But there was something new there, something the other immortals immediately felt with discomfort. The warning hadn't come from sovereignty, but from the fear of losing control of the narrative. Athena watched him without backing down. In her eyes there was no scream, no tears, no hesitation. There was only the calculated coldness of someone who had finally seen the whole mechanism. "Careful of what?" she asked. "Of the truth? Of my mother's name? Of the fact that Olympus fed for centuries on a violence called a miracle?" Each question landed with the precision of a hammer striking bronze. The words didn't need to be shouted. They had another kind of brutality. They were sharp, and clarity in that place was more offensive than any insult. Hera pressed her fingers against the arm of the throne until her nails scratched the gold. Apollo kept his face still, but his breathing no longer followed its usual rhythm. Hermes seemed smaller within his own lightness, as if the agility of his nature couldn't find a way through that thick atmosphere. Hestia remained by the flame, but now the fire beside her flickered uncertainly, as if even the sacred hearth feared what might be left of the home after that night. "I preserved the sky," Zeus said at last. And that phrase, which in other eras would have sounded grand, came out with the unpleasant weight of an excuse repeated too many times. Athena tilted her head slightly, like someone examining a faulty piece. "No," she replied. "You preserved your own seat. You called it order, but it was just your fear dressed up as authority." Eris lowered his eyes. Even he, a lover of direct confrontation, understood that this wound would not be closed by force. The wind outside beat against the tall windows. The sky now had the color of metal freshly pulled from a shipwreck. The statues in the gardens were losing small chips of marble, and a murmur of cracks ran through the palace corridors, as if the very architecture were listening to the accusation and reconsidering its loyalty to its masters. Olympus, so used to being the stage for judgments, was discovering the horror of becoming the accused. Then Athena raised her hand and pointed to Zeus's throne, not with hysteria, not with raw hatred, but with the terrible calm of a sentence already decided. "That seat," she said, "is not stained by war, nor by error, nor by necessity. It is stained by digestion. It stands upon the silenced body of a goddess you erased so that power could keep a clean face." No one dared interrupt her. Poseidon took a step forward, maybe to try to stop the inevitable, or maybe just to remind himself that he was still a god of ancient greatness. "If you break everything, what's left?" he asked. Athena turned to him without changing her expression. "What remains is what should have always existed, a truth that doesn't need to be buried to keep the roof standing." Her answer sent a nearly physical discomfort through the council, because in that moment everyone realized the extent of the complicity they had called stability. Zeus raised his lightning bolt. The flashes gathered in his hand, alive, unstable, hungry for obedience. For a moment, the entire hall believed that the king of the sky would choose violence, as the powerful always do when cornered by the truth. But Athena didn't move. She stood still, upright, under the threat of the storm, and that stillness was the harshest humiliation Zeus had ever received. The lightning bolt in his hand suddenly seemed vulgar. "If you hurt me," Athena said, her voice low, like iron scraping against stone, "you'll prove everything to him. And if you don't hurt me, you'll have to listen to the end." Zeus remained motionless, his arm tense, his throat tight, the throne behind him already seeming smaller. It was then that everyone understood the true scope of Athena's challenge. She wasn't just confronting the gods. She was reducing their authority to what it had always been when stripped of myth, fear trying to rule by tradition. Zeus's arm remained raised, crackling with living lightning, but the blow never came. The hall realized this even before anyone admitted it. There was a brutal difference between power and courage, and that night the king of the gods discovered, in front of everyone, that he still possessed the first without being sure of the second. Athena remained motionless. Her calm wasn't peace, it was control. The kind of control that turns an opponent's hesitation into a sentence. Hera was the first to grasp the extent of the defeat, not because she loved the truth more than the others, but because she understood the value of appearances within power. A throne doesn't fall only when it's destroyed. It falls when it stops looking invincible. And Zeus, standing before his daughter, with the lightning bolt raised and his decision rotten in his own hand, no longer looked like the absolute ruler. He looked like a man cornered by what he always thought he could hide. Athena then took another step forward. The marble beneath her feet groaned softly, as if the palace itself felt ashamed for having served so long under an order upheld by silence. "Look closely," she said without raising her voice, and everyone looked. Apollo, Hermes, Poseidon, Ares, Hestia, Hera. Even the lesser gods pressed against the columns. That's how everything remained intact for ages. Not because of justice, not because of wisdom, but out of fear of calling the crime by its name. Zeus finally lowered his arms slowly, like someone setting down a weapon too heavy to keep holding without breaking along with it. The sound of the lightning being withdrawn was small, but it made a bigger impact in the hall than any explosion. There was no battle, no glorious clash. There was something worse for the proud. Acknowledgement. For the first time, all of Olympus saw that Athena could not be stopped because she came armed with a force none of them had prepared a defense against. "You called me the guardian of order," she continued, and now each word seemed etched in the air. "You made me the protector of laws, of cities, and of intelligence, but you hid from me the origin of my own name. You built my glory on the silence of my mother and expected me to call that balance." Hestia wept in silence. Hermes closed his eyes. Ares clenched his jaw, more uncomfortable than he had ever been in the face of blood. Outside, the storm did not break. It circled Olympus like a chained animal, unable to decide whether to tear open the sky or retreat before the verdict already sealed inside the hall. The statues in the gardens lost more chips. A side column developed a thin crack that ran all the way down to the base. Nothing actually collapsed, and that was what made everything even more terrifying. The world wasn't being destroyed, it was being unmasked. Athena lifted her face and looked at each god, as if engraving names onto a tombstone. "I didn't come to set the sky on fire," she said. "I came to make it remember." The phrase fell in the center of the hall with the weight of an epitaph, because memory was exactly what Olympus feared most. War can be won, rebellion can be crushed, but memory, once returned to its rightful place, contaminates everything that was built to deny it. Hera, with a voice softer than she had ever allowed herself, finally spoke. "And what do you want?" Athena turned to her. There was no triumph on her face, only armed mourning. "I want Metis' name to return to the temples. I want the chance to be corrected. I want every altar where my origins were adorned with lies to be forced to bear the truth. I want Olympus to live with what it tried to bury." No one dared to argue, and it was in that moment that everyone understood the title of that night, even though no one spoke it aloud. Athena had challenged the gods, yes, but the real scandal wasn't in the challenge itself. It was in the fact that none of them, not Zeus with his lightning, nor Poseidon with his seas, nor Ares with his brutality, nor Hera with her crown, had managed to stop her, because she hadn't brought sword against sword. She had brought truth against power. When Athena turned to leave the hall, no one tried to block her way. The doors opened before she even touched them. The wind swept in, the torches flickered, and all of Olympus stood still. hearing only the echo of her footsteps fading down the corridors. That night, the gods remained alive, the throne still stood, and the sky did not fall. But something much greater had been broken forever, the certainty that the immortals would never have to answer for what they had done.